If this does look a little bit intimidating to you, then to simplify it, just think of it like this. Hey guys, hope you're all doing well as usual. In this video I'm going to be talking about my electrical system in the van because I've had quite a few questions about it and people seem to be interested and want to know. I thought, I'll go into detail and explain how I set it up and the stuff that I used. But to give you a quick rundown on what I've got, I've installed 3 batteries in the van, 2 120 amp hours and 1 55 amp hour. So I've got a total of 295 amp hours of battery. They're all deep cycle AGM. And to charge them, I've got 2 solar panels on the roof. They are monocrystalline, 150 watt panels. So I've got a total of 300 watts of solar, which is plenty for me. And then I also have a battery charger which draws power from the alternator when the vehicle's running. So if it's a bit rainy or something for a few days, or I just need to give it an extra charge, then the alternator will charge it up. And that charger is actually quite a good charger. It's a good one to get. They're not particularly cheap, but it is a CTEK D250SA designed for the smart alternators. And the reason I like that one is because when I use that one, I don't need to buy a separate solar charge controller. It's all built into the one unit. So when the vehicle's running, it will draw power from the alternator. But when you turn the vehicle off, if there's solar power coming in, it will switch over automatically and you don't have to worry about all that sort of stuff. As I said, they're not that cheap, but they are easy to set up. They make the install simpler, and I used one in my last van. It wasn't the SA, it was just the S, designed for normal alternators, but basically the same unit, and it worked really well. It was really reliable, so I thought I'd stick with what I know and stick with what's proven, and it's been really good. So that's what I've got. And then basically what that is powering, I've got 2 fantastic vent fans in the roof, and I've got lights all throughout the van. I've got a 65 litre Dometic Waco compressor fridge, which runs off 12 volt. And I've also got outlets throughout the van and a 24-inch 12 volt TV. And then for other appliances that aren't 12 volt, I've got a 400 watt sine wave inverter. And with the 295 amp hours of battery and the 300 watts of solar, it's plenty for me to charge everything I need, have the lights running, fans going, fridge going 24/7. I don't have any issues. The only time when I'll notice it will drop a little bit is if I'm running the PlayStation 4, but that's because that sucks the power and I don't do that very often. But even with that, I've never gone below 12 volts. I've always been around, 12.5, maybe 12.4 if I use a little bit extra, if it's been, overcast or rainy for a few days. So yeah, it's a good system. It suits my usage perfectly. And I learnt from my last van, which I only had the one battery, 100 amp hours, and I had one 145 watt solar panel. Was good, but I did notice that if I was using my laptop, for example, with an inverter, it would drain it quite a bit. So there was a couple of times when I ran the battery quite low there. So most of my electrical system's actually underneath my bed. It's in this little boxed in section here. I'll move the mattress out of the way in a sec and show you that, but you can see from the outside I've got access to AC power that's connected to the inverter, and I'm actually charging a couple of things at the moment, just making the most of the sunlight I've got. And then you've also got these switches here. There's 6 switches there, and they control the fans, lights, inverter, and the water pump. And they're just basically isolator switches. You turn them off and the power goes off to whatever device it's feeding. And then you can also see I've got a gauge here that tells me the voltage of the starter battery and the house batteries. It looks like it's flashing in the video. That's just because of the LEDs. It's actually solid in real life, but you might have seen that before. So I'll just turn the camera off for a sec, move the mattress out of the way, and I'll show you how I get to the rest of the stuff inside. So this is what the bed looks like when you move the mattress out of the way. I've just lent it up on the side there, and you can see I've got the slats across here, and down the middle here you can see the hinges. That's where the bed folds up and out of the way so that you can get to the back of the van. But to get into the electrical compartment, now bear in mind I've put a couple of torches in there. I don't actually have lights in there, but I thought it would be easier to show you guys everything. So there's a couple of torches on. To get in there, you slide this out of the way, pull it up, and basically put that aside, and it acts like a hatch. It opens up and you've got this big wide opening that you can either, you know, replace batteries or install new components, whatever you need to do. And this is what I worked through when I built the van. So to give you a rundown on what's in here, these two blue batteries here, they're the Deep Cycle AGM full river batteries. They're 120 amp hours each, and that's what I actually started with in the van, was just those two. But then a friend of mine gave me this battery, which is a 55 amp hour, so now I've got 295 amp hours total, and I just used an Anderson plug to attach that one, so it's easily removed. And I did that for a couple of reasons. It made it easier to install, but also it means now I've got a portable battery, so I can use it for portable power if I need to jump start the vehicle or something. And I have actually had to do that before, because I was listening to music and I drained my starter battery. I just pulled this one out and plugged it in to the starter battery and jump started the vehicle. So I'm pretty happy with that. That's a good little tip if anyone's installing batteries. This is the CTEK battery charger I was telling you about, and on the top here you've got the solar input. Underneath that is the alternator input. You've got a negative here, and then this one here is the output, which goes to the batteries. And then to the side here you can see I've got two isolator switches. This top one here isolates the charging system from the starter battery, so if you wanted to work on something, or you just need to isolate it for whatever reason, you can just switch that off. Under here is another isolator. This one is isolating from the house batteries, so for whatever reason, let's say you need to replace a battery or working on something, you can just isolate that. Underneath here you can see this is a fuse. This is the fuse between the house batteries and the fuse box. It's always good to have the fuses as close to the power source as possible. That's why I've got it literally right next to the battery. These fuses are quite easy to install and use. That's why I've decided to go with them. As you can see, I've got a second one down here. That one actually goes to the inverter, which is down the bottom there. You can see that. It's a 400 watt pure sine wave inverter, and you can see there I've got it plugged in, and it basically just goes over the top there to the power board, which you would have seen earlier. This here is a shared negative. I'll just get it to focus so you can see. That's a shared negative there, which connects to pretty much everything in here, and then runs out to the starter battery negative, so that it all shares that common point. And it just keeps things a bit simpler and easier, and you just have less wires to run. So I installed that because this is a little bit more complicated than my last install, and there's a lot more wiring in here. It actually looks worse than it is though. It looks more confronting than it actually is. So don't be afraid if you're looking at this and thinking you don't even know where to start. It's quite simple. It's just the wires make it look a bit complicated. If this does look a little bit intimidating to you, then to simplify it, just think of it like this. You've got the batteries, the charger, the fuse box over here, I've got an inverter and some switches. Everything else is either isolator switches, fuses in between, or wiring. And the wiring is always the thing that makes it look daunting, but when you build something like this, you don't need to have all the wires in place at the same time. You know, you start with bringing the power in. So this black conduit that comes from the ground, this is the conduit that goes to the starter battery, and I just brought in the big thick power cables that I needed and the small little signal wires that I needed. So there's only 4 wires in there. You have the 2 big big power cords. One of them's the negatives, the black one. That goes to this shared negative here. And then the positive, the red one, just goes through the switch and to the charger. That means I've now brought power into this area. And then from there, I go out of the charger, through another isolator, and into the batteries. And then from there, I've got another wire that comes out with a fuse, just for safety, and that goes into the fuse box. That means that I've now got power coming from the alternator starter battery into the charger. The charger is now charging the batteries, and I've got power coming out of the batteries into the fuse box. That's where it starts to get a little bit complicated, and it starts to mess things up, because you've got lots of little wires that are all running off to switches and then back out to appliances and lights and things. But it's actually quite simple if you break it down and you just start at the beginning and you go step by step. So anyone that's keen on giving it a go, it's not as complicated as it looks. But like I said, that is the conduit that's coming from the front of the vehicle. That's where I'm getting my power from. And then a lot of these cables come from the fuse box, and they go over here to the switches. And then from the switches, they go down here into another conduit, and that actually goes under the floor and over to my sort of kitchen cabinet area, which is a bit of a mess at the moment. And that's where I power my fridge and some outlets and things like that. I've got my water pump under there. So that's how that all connects up. So for any of the wires that don't follow down through this black conduit into the kitchen area, they actually go up and they come through the bed here, and they go into this white trunking, and that leads all the way out to the roof, where they can either go left under this panel, which is actually removable for servicing, and they go all the way to the back to the light or outlets or whatever I've got at the back. Or it can go to the right here, and it follows round and underneath the ceiling there, and you can actually get to all the way around to the other side. And that's where this light is getting its power from. So the wires have come around underneath this section here, which again is also removable, so that I can access it in the future if I want to service something, or if I want to add another light or something like that. This whole section is removable, and it goes all the way down the back of the van. But it also powers these lights under here, and I've designed it that way just because I like things to be easy to service and add to later on. I know a lot of people that run the wiring behind the walls, and they drill holes and put proper outlets and stuff. But for me, I don't like that idea, because I don't know if I'm going to change my mind in a year or 6 months or something and want to put a different outlet or move something or put a new light somewhere. So I just try to design it in such a way that I can just pull panels off and add things to it later on. I don't know if you guys are into that, but there's a little tip for you. So as well as showing you guys my electrical system, I've actually come up with a few tips that will hopefully help some of you out if you're thinking of doing something similar. I've just written them down, and it's just a few little tips, but hopefully, like I said, hopefully it helps someone out. On the top of the list, I had to make sure that you fuse everything. So you saw in my installation, I've got fuses everywhere. It's really important to do that. You really don't want to be playing around with electricity, because you can start fires and things like that, and that's not fun. So fuse everything, and also make sure that you fuse things as close to the power source as possible. So if it's coming from a battery, have the fuse as close to the battery as possible. That just leaves less room for error for short circuits and things like that. The other thing that I was going to say is on cabling. When you're picking out cables, if in doubt, just go thicker. So if you are trying to size up a cable based on the ampage of the device that's going to be supplied by it, if you're not sure, if you think that it's going to be close, then just go the next size up. It's always better to be safe than sorry. You obviously don't want to go too oversized, but it's always safer to go a little bit over than a little bit under. And that actually brings me to another point I was going to say. When you're running cables, if you are running them a long distance, you actually can get voltage drop, and the best way to get around that is to run a thicker cable. So you've got to work out And they normally, like if you go to a store, they might have a chart or something like that, or they'll have knowledge on that sort of thing so they can help you with it. But if not, you can find all the information on the internet like I did. And it's just based on how many amps you're going to be using and the distance that the cabling is going to be run. So something that might be safe for say 15 amps, if you run it over a long distance, it would actually, you would lose some voltage, and you wouldn't get the power that you were requiring at the other end, and you'd be better off going another size up. Then on top of that, I had another tip to do with inverters. Try not to rely on inverters when you're designing your build. So when I designed my build, I designed it with the idea that most things were going to run off 12 volt. I don't want to have too many 240 volt appliances, because inverters, they're pretty power hungry, and it's always good to have an inverter, but not to have everything running off it, because you're really wasting a lot of power there. Even just having an inverter turned on and sitting there uses some power. But there's a lot of power lost through heat, and that's not really what you want in a van. You want to get maximum efficiency. So all my fans, lights, TV, fridge, like everything runs off 12 volt. I've only got the inverter there for things that, you know, like charging my camera battery and toothbrush, whatever, like things like that, running my laptop, which you can get 12 volt adapters for, but you know, I just don't have the time or the money to go and find all those adapters. But yeah, try and run as many things as you can off 12 volt and don't rely on the inverters as much. And the last tip that I was going to say is when it comes to batteries and amp hours, a lot of people see 100 amp hours and they think, oh great, I've got 100 amp hours to use. Well, not really. Maybe if you are running lithium batteries, they can be drained considerably more than AGMs, but in my case I'm using AGM batteries, and you don't really want to drain them much below 50% capacity. So if you've got, like I've got 295 amp hours, let's round it up to 300. I can only really use safely about 150 amp hours, and after that it actually starts to cause damage to the batteries, which you obviously don't want to do, and the more you do it, the more damage you're going to cause. So bear that in mind when you're picking batteries. You've kind of got a half the amount that it says on there, and that's your usable amp hours. So yeah, hopefully this video has helped you out, guys. Let me know if it has. Let me know if there's something else that you want to know about, if something I didn't cover in the video. Leave all your comments below. Make sure you like the video, subscribe, and all that stuff, and I'll see you next time.